Imagine walking into a room where you're supposed to negotiate for a country's survival. You're the president of a nation fighting for its life, and sitting across from you is a man who doesn't respect you. A room full of politicians who don't care about you. And a deal that asks you to sell off your future while giving you nothing in return. That's exactly what happened when Zelensky came to Washington recently. And yet, the narrative being pushed that he was the one who refused to cooperate. That Ukraine, after 3 years of fighting, after tens of thousands of deaths, should have just rolled over and handed the US its resources on a silver platter. That somehow, standing up for his country, made Zelensky the bad guy. But let's cut through the nonsense. What really happened? What's really at stake? And why is the truth being buried under mountains of disinformation? Let's talk about the so-called mineral deal between the US and Ukraine. The one people think Zelensky refused to sign. If you've been on social media, you've probably heard versions of this story. Ukraine came to Washington, refused to hand over its mineral wealth, and now US support is up in the air. But like most things, the truth is a little bit more complicated and a lot less flattering for those pushing this narrative. Ukraine is rich in rare earth minerals, lithium, cobalt, and other resources critical for the modern economy. The US wanted a deal to gain access to these materials, with 50% of the profits supposedly going to a reconstruction fund for Ukraine. That sounds reasonable, right? Well, not if you're Ukraine. Zelensky didn't reject the deal out of stubbornness. He hesitated because there were no clear security guarantees for Ukraine's future. Imagine your house is on fire and somebody offers to buy your land while the flames are still burning. You might ask, what happens if I sell? Will you help me rebuild? Will you help protect me from the guy who set the fire in the first place? Ukraine wanted assurances, something beyond vague promises, before handing over a huge chunk of its economic future. And let's be honest, when a country is at war, giving away its most valuable resources while fighting for its existence and survival isn't just bad business, it's national suicide. But here's where things take a turn. The mineral deal wasn't the only thing on display in Washington. Trump, for reasons that should concern everyone, decided to treat Zelensky like a nuisance rather than an ally. Marco Rubio, the senator reportedly handling this mineral deal behind closed doors, didn't say a word when things went sideways. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance openly disrespected Zelensky, acting as if Ukraine should be grateful for whatever scraps the U.S. throws its way. And then there's Trump himself, posturing, acting like Ukraine is a burden, pretending that cutting aid would somehow be tough on Russia. But here's what's missing from the narrative. U.S. support for Ukraine has been a massive economic win for America and the American economy. Roughly 70% of the money allocated to Ukraine actually stayed in the United States, funding weapons manufacturing, defense jobs and contracts, and production in more than 70 cities across the country. The war effort has pumped billions into the American economy, strengthening the defense industry, securing jobs, and expanding production lines. So if Trump and his allies truly cared about America first, they'd be celebrating this financial windfall, not pretending aid is some kind of act of charity. Let's tackle another major myth while we're at it. The claim that the U.S. has sent $350 billion in aid to Ukraine. That's false. The actual number is about half that. And that's not money being handed to Ukraine in a briefcase full of cash. Most of the money is in the form of weapons, logistical support, and economic aid meant to keep Ukraine functioning while fighting for its survival and freedom. Now, this is the part people forget. Supporting Ukraine isn't about generosity. It's about strategic interests, weakening Russia without shedding American blood, keeping Europe stable, and ensuring the world sees that invading a sovereign nation comes with consequences. The final point I want to hit is this. People love to say, we just want the war to stop. And who doesn't? No one wants to see destruction. But when someone says this war needs to end, what do they actually mean? Because ending a war and winning a war are not the same thing. If Ukraine stops fighting today, it loses its territory, its people, its economy, everything. If Russia stops fighting, the war is over. That's the difference. Now, let's not pretend Russia's goals are some mystery. Here's the reality. If we let this disinformation win, if we allow the narrative to be rewritten so that Ukraine is the problem instead of the victim, then we're complicit in something much bigger than just bad politics. We're complicit in the betrayal of an ally. We're complicit in the normalization of might makes right. And worst of all, we're complicit in setting the stage for the next war. Because if Russia gets what it wants here, it won't stop. And we know this. And if we don't stand by Ukraine now, what happens when it's Taiwan or another U.S. ally? The fight isn't just happening on the battlefield. It's happening in every conversation, in America, in Ukraine, across Europe, in every comment section, in every moment where truth goes up against a well-funded machine of lies and propaganda. So ask yourself, are you going to be someone who falls for it? Or are you going to be the person who calls it out? Because history is being written right now. And whether you like it or not, you're part of it. And in moments like this, there are only two paths. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. Matthew 7:13 and 14. The wide gate is easy. It's comfortable. It's repeating whatever narrative gets the most clicks, siding with whoever shouts the loudest, and ignoring the uncomfortable truth, the truth of what is right and what is wrong. But the narrow gate, that's the hard road, the road of standing for what's right, even when it's inconvenient, even when their peer pressure is overwhelming, even when it costs you something. The choice is yours. Which path do you take?